Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer, and before we get started, just a quick note, if you are watching this on the Off Planet Media YouTube channel, please also go over and subscribe to Emily Moyer. Some of my material will continue to appear here, but it will all appear on the Emily Moyer YouTube channel, and it will appear there first. And now we can move on to today's programming. This is episode 6 of Project Kids. My good friend Michael Wann is with me, and we don't pre-show anymore. We just jump right in so you guys can hear all the stuff we talk about, but there is one announcement before we get started, and that is we are ready to go with the Project Kids Summer Camp. This will be a working group, a sort of think tank kind of thing, and we'll be ready to start with this. The first meeting will be the second Sunday in August. And so if you are interested in that, you can contact me on Facebook at Emily Moyer or by email at technobrat21@gmail.com. There are a couple ways you'll be able to access this. There's a Patreon option, a PayPal option, and I will just give you some more details so you can decide if you want to go ahead and join us. And we're really excited about it. We have some really cool ideas, and we want this to be like a fully participatory working group kind of experience where we can all tap into each other's experiences, knowledge, magic, all that kind of stuff, and just see what kind of weird places we can go with it. So we're looking forward to it, and we hope you will join us. Michael, buddy, welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. And I want to pick up just where you left off, because I think you presented it in a very balanced, very oh, just come enjoy, and we're doing this, because I don't see it that way. I see it the shit's hit the fan, my friends. They're not telling you that it's hit the fan, but this is hitting the fan.
He's right, yes.
This is how we figure it out.
Yes.
We don't know where we are. We don't know what we're looking for. We don't know how to figure it out, but that is the intention of this. So all the stuff you just said is totally true. You come and we talk about share our experiences and we do this, but the reason is it's not just this is it.
This is it. And this is actually why, instead of going through all of that here, I just said, contact me so I can send people an email letting them know what it's going to be, what it's not going to be, so they can kind of decide. I didn't want to take a lot of time here explaining all of that because I want to get on to our cool conversation. But no, I agree with you 100%.
Well, I want to jump right in. So what's that around your neck right now?
This?
Yeah.
It's a tensor ring.
Okay, and I want to be very clear. No one's getting sponsorship dollars for what's about to unfold. Now, where did you get that?
I got it from Masaki Miyagawa, but he got it from the Sage place in South Dakota that you got yours from.
So it's this place in South Dakota. I've got this on my neck. This was given to me by Jenny, when was it? A couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
We never purchased anything on there. It's not it's the Walmart of copper devices. But this is the sort of when at least my approach, when we're doing this and we're connecting, it's we don't quite grasp what being alive on Earth means because we've always been alive in Earth in these kind of weird ways, but it's changing, and it's changing in this very, very tangible sort of way. And what I mean is how come we just bought the same thing from the opposite place? Why is our opposite part of the world? What we're playing with that type of understanding of reality because we can see what's being shut down, what's coming right now. But it's guess what? That was a poke through. How did that happen? I don't know.
It was funny. When you, the first time that you noticed this, I knew what you were going to say because Laura, I get these from Masaki, who comes on the show, but he gets them from someone else. And I went and looked at their website, and there was all this cool stuff. And Laura's looking at it oh, cool, they're from South Dakota. And then literally, I think it was either later that day or the next day, you're coming on and you show me your thing, and you're like, Jenny got it from this place in South Dakota. Right? It's just, every time we talk, even the other day when you and I had a brief conversation before this, we sometimes do that. We'll either have a quick set of emails or a brief conversation a few days before, just maybe a few lines about what we're going to talk about. And I came with an impossibly weird topic, and he's like, oh my God, we were just having a conversation about that yesterday and whatever. So this is I guess what we're trying to say here is while we're naming Project Kids Summer Camp and we're kind of presenting it in this way, like, oh, it's almost like you call something summer camp to hide the fact that it's going to be some serious balls to the wall experimentation. Only come if you're ready to play, and I don't mean in the sandbox, I mean in the mud.
Yes, that's what we're doing. It's like, all of the testing which was created, it was created for where we are right now. So I can't tell you if it was because they created the environment and they created the players to participate, or they knew what was coming, or if this is the byproduct of that. It's connected, and it has this kind of, it's like, guess this is it. And so, right now, talking, listening, being open, increasing awareness, and seeing how it's spilling over. I've got such a friggin' story to share. I don't even know when we're going to begin. So it's like, I'm excited about talking about what's gone on in the past 2 weeks, but I want to begin by opening the door to you, because I'm going to go down 4 flights of below surface levels. So I want to give it over to you first.
So I actually feel like, let's go with your below 4 flights, right? Let's go with your below floor flights. I have kind of one thing I want to talk about today, really, and I feel like it's sort of on the other side of the 4 flights of stairs. And we're going to talk about sort of invisible dimensions and doorways that exist on the other side of the shadows. So let's walk through let's take the stairs down into the basement, and in the scary shadow later, we'll open the dimensions to the doorways to the other dimensions.
Yeah. Okay. I like how that's being done. So, about I don't know, we started this whole thing about me moving into the church, right? Moving in, I'm like, this is an unusual experience, this is an unusual time, and it's like, let's just see what unfolds. And I've developed, I started sharing personal kind of stories on the computer box a year and a half ago. Before that, I didn't. And then I just recently, with Instagram and with YouTube, and I've shown throughout this time period, actual stories in my life, you could see it happening real time. Oh, I talked about this, and then this happened, and I shared that. And so this is going to be a continuation, and I've demonstrated a continuity of really strange, there's an undeniable sort of a structure which is happening beneath the scenes or outside of our very, very conscious awareness. And this is going to be another one of those stories.
Awesome.
So I finished that time in the church, and I was doing some traveling and planning for what's coming up next. And a friend of mine, Ben, a guy who I've known for a long time, in fact, I've officiated 3 weddings in my life.
Oh, wow.
Yes. One of them, I've delivered 2 children, and I've officiated 3 weddings. For whatever reason, I like that. But anyway, this is one of the people whose weddings I had officiated. And this guy's this master gardener. And he takes care of a lot of properties. And he's listen, there's this, and he's younger than me. I'd say he's probably mid-30s. Awesome guy, one of the most interesting people I know. And he's I got this job, and I got to clean out everything that's in the bottom of this house in Lancaster. So, and we got to auction off and throw away a lot of stuff. And I just saw the stuff you did on the church, and would you be interested in helping me for a week? And I'm like, hell yeah. It's in this old house in Lancaster built in the 1800s. And so I was excited to do it. And I really like going through stuff, and and I wanted to be around my friend Ben. So I go into this house, and it's, if you're familiar with any of my Lancaster City work, particularly the Mystic Lancaster stuff, parts 2 and 3, that's what, this is in that epicenter where the alchemical wedding site is where this house is located. Built in the 1860s, 5,000 square feet, city house. And it's in moderate disrepair. There are parts of it that are still spectacular, and there are parts of it that are eh. So I come in, and immediately, I just kind of was I had a feeling there's something going on in this house. And in a good way, I was really intrigued. And we go in the basement, and the house has been in the same family up until recently. That family, I think it's the 5th generation, the grandkids are now living in Seattle, and they sold the house. And it's the first time it's leaving. So the same family has been able to use the house for storage for 150 years. So there was like some really, really interesting stuff. I'm going through all this, and people are coming in, and antique buyers and used bookstore. Like the whole thing was just a carnival for me. I'm having the most fun. And the first thing that happened was I got this horrible sinus headache. Like I don't get headaches. I might have like one headache every year, maybe one every 2 years. And this thing was horrendous. But anyway, I eventually come back, and right on the last day, right when we're getting it all done, I find out whose house it is. And I'm going through all their stuff. I'm going through their books. I'm like picturing in my mind, like this was a doctor's house. It was a well-to-do family. And there was a decent amount of esoteric literature in their library, like from the 1900s sort of stuff. Like a lot of the books were just covered in mold. Like, you know, that's where the like the physicality of the sinuses. Yeah, I got that, but there was more going on. So I'm going through all this. So that's like happening in my life. At the same time, I've got two children. I've got a 14-year-old and I got a 13-year-old. And if you're following that, if you got children, you know that school is becoming like a big deal. And I am not espousing. I do not follow. In fact, I'm not particularly knowledgeable of the philosophies of Rudolph Steiner. But I send my children to a Waldorf school. And the Waldorf school, what I am very aware of is like more of the details. And like I know about how the Waldorf school is in alignment with his with the Steiner philosophies.
Yeah.
And I flirt with them a lot, but I don't really actually study them. I'm not familiar with them. As I said, like I'm not like, you know, saying like support this. I'm just saying like this is a theme. So my children go to this Waldorf school, and I've been involved with this Waldorf school from a very long time. Like I've had a strange connection to it. Even before I had children, when I first moved to Lancaster, like there was something there. All of this, if you've seen Mystic Lancaster Point Part 3, and I talk about the Rose Line ends at this Waldorf school. And my children have gone there for 8 years, and my ex-wife, she eventually became like the director of admissions there. And that was really like a doorway opened up, you know, through my interest, even though I don't really know Steiner that well. And I lived across the street from it. Like right when I did all of this like Susquehanna mystery research, like all of it's right there. So it's all intertwined. So I'm going through all this sort of stuff. I'm in this house. I just moved out of the church. The world is going crazy. And I'm like, you know, and I see whose house it is. And it is the founder of the Waldorf school, which my children went to 35 years earlier. I'm cleaning out his house there's a very good chance the school is going to close, which is a real disappointment. But like I'm sitting in the house of the energy of the actual people who made it happen. They were like 70 years old in life. They were like the second or third generation who lived there. Their daughter just died, and her children are the ones who inherited. So this is like that far. The guy was like 70 years old. I knew him because in the school where my children went, it was built in 1899. And when you walk in, it's called the Williams Hall, and there's a picture, and it's of like Dorothea and Hal Williams, and it says like, you know, if it wasn't for their guiding light, this would have never happened. And that's about as much as I knew. And I realized at the last moment, this is friggin' Hal and Dorothea's house. I saw their names. It was 6 sets. All of the esoteric literature. This is the only house I've ever friggin' cleaned out. I'm not like a friggin' house cleaner. Like this is the one. I've studied this school. I'm connected to it deeply. It's about to go under, and I find myself in their backyard, literally, like metaphorically. I'm going through their stuff. And that's just layer one. I'll stop for a minute. I'll let you ask a question.
All right. So I don't know that I have a lot of questions. How did Ben end up with this job cleaning the house?
So Ben, cleaning out the house.
Yeah.
So he's a master gardener. Lancaster has like many like estates, and like like urban estates from when it was built, like a quarter acre, half acre, and they're exquisitely maintained. And he kind of plays in that circle, and this house kind of fits in that circle. So I think because he has a reputation for like within a certain, like doing certain things, like it made sense. I think at some point he might have done something in the garden in the backyard, but I mean, the truth of the matter is like the top floor was like, you know, it was like they were renting out by the room. Like, you know, it was like kind of flop housey.
Yeah.
This was once like it was really like strange energy. Like on one hand, it was this exquisite property. And then on this other hand, it's like, it's in total disrepair. Like, you know, no one has really kind of lived in it with seriously for some time. And it had like it hadn't been touched since 1978.
All right. So I'm gonna see if I can work my magic with this one. So first of all, what's interesting about this, because we were just talking about how there's always a little connection somewhere between what Michael and I are doing and it comes about. So there's a Waldorf thing going on in my family as well, because, well, I don't have any children. My sister does. So I have one nephew, and he goes to the Waldorf school in Lexington outside of Boston, right? And his father, my sister's husband, taught at Waldorf schools for a long time. And he went to Waldorf school as a kid. And he just last week joined the board at the Waldorf school because they're trying to decide if school will be coming back or not. So, right, so we have this sort of Waldorf thing kind of here going on, right, that simultaneously. And in fact, when I was talking to my sister the other day, we had to be quiet because Walter was upstairs having the board meeting with the Waldorf school. And so I'm familiar with I think the same as you. I know some stuff about Waldorf and some stuff about Rudolph Steiner. Obviously, like a lot of the teachings and ideas and things of Rudolph Steiner cross over heavily into the kind of research of a lot of the people that you and I have followed and learned things from, right? And so I do remember, like I can't remember if it was the first time that when Randy and I talked to you together, or if this was when I heard you talking on somebody else's show, but when you were talking about, like, you're sure that someone like Francis Bacon is kind of still around, like they maybe sort of like have a slightly different name that is sort of similar, right? Or whatever, but like these people, like they're sort of timeless or ageless, or so I would say, and I started this half jokingly, but I think you're very familiar with Rudolph Steiner, but you're not super familiar with Rudolph Steiner through Rudolph Steiner. But I do have an idea of who one of the people you are familiar with him through would be, whether you know it or not, and that's Jon Rappoport.
They look identical.
Yes, identical.
Every time I look at that, I'm like, this MF is Rudolph Steiner.
Okay, so everybody can go back about 2 months ago and watch a show that Robert and I did on Matrix Mash called When Rudolph Became Rappoport. Okay, or When Rappoport was Rudolph or something like that. So I'm like, Robert and I sent a lot of texts back together, and a lot of them are really good stuff, and a lot of them are just nonsense, weird thoughts one of us will have, but it's good to record it with someone else who sort of does the kind of thing that you do, so it can be talked about later if there's anything there. I'm sitting on the toilet, right, looking at my phone, and seeing a picture of Rudolph Steiner, or I can't remember if I was looking at Rudolph Steiner or Jon Rappoport. I'm like, holy shit, like Robert loves those, like when you find like the person from the 1800s who looks like Jay-Z and shit like that, Robert loves that. He can bust that shit out like one after the other. Look at this one, look at this one.
I love it too.
All right, yeah, so it's fun. So I'm sitting there on Twitter and I'm like, dude, this fucker looks like Rudolph Steiner. And I go pull up the picture of Rudolph Steiner and I pull up the picture of Jon Rappoport next to it. And I'm like, dude, Jon Rappoport supposedly is 81 years old. First of all, he looks like he's in his 50s. So I think we're dealing here with somebody who has transcended linear age as we understand it. And so, which is something Rudolph Steiner, both by the techniques he practiced, the things he believed, would have mastered, right? And would be sort of replicating over and over again with, at a certain point you have to explain why everyone else is aging and you're not, why all your spouses have died, right, or whatever, but you're not getting up. So he's in probably round 3 of this or something, if it's true. But yes, I think that there is whether he actually is, which I think there's a possibility, or whether it's just this is the way, sort of like he's the heir apparent, like somehow he inherited both a way of thinking it's like Rudolph Steiner that can be applied to modern technological times, and also so that people like you and I can make that connection. He also inherited the look so that we can go, okay.
Well, let me say right now, that's the doctrine of signatures. Like whether it's the same actual person or not, it's the same signature.
Yes.
And it's as simple as like, they look identical.
Identical. So for everybody right now, just stop, push pause for a second, go pull up Jon Rappoport, go pull up Rudolph Steiner. And then if you look, there's a certain people in the alternative media who obviously know a whole lot about Rudolph Steiner. People like Alana Freeland and Kara St. Louis, both have been Waldorf teachers and studied extensively Rudolph Steiner. But I think if you extrapolate and pull into modern times what Rudolph Steiner was saying, and then watch the way that Jon Rappoport has put his series of courses together and the way he breaks down what's happening out there and then ties it to the power of the individual to sort of transcend this sort of myriad of weird things we're looking at, it's very obvious to me that it's the same system, or it's the updated version of that system that he is teaching people.
I've been following Rappoport for a long time, and he's one of the few individuals where I consistently have spent my money, like on all of his stuff, all of his systems. I mean, I got them all a long time ago. And it's funny because I've thought about them looking identical for some period of time, but I never thought I would ever actually know someone who would know who both of these individuals are. And then also, not everyone can see things like, I'm really good at identifying like certain facial features that are the same. Like I can identify like two people have the exact same eye structure. I see that very clearly. And when I say that, like, no, that's not the case. But I put pictures side by side. Oh yeah, yeah. So like I always thought that about Steiner and Rappoport, but I never thought anyone else would see that. And the fact that you're like that's fantastic. You're absolutely right. Like you hit the bullseye in two ways. One, like I'm a huge Rappoport. I do know Rappoport very well, and I've thought that I've had the exact same observation. It's that picture of Steiner when he's young and he's got on like this black jacket and he's like from a certain side. And he and Jon, when you get his newsletter, it's got that little picture of him. It looks identical.
It's crazy. So the last thread I want to pull on the things you just said, where I think it's interesting that you have found yourself spending the summer cleaning out spaces, right? Mm-hmm. And the first space that you were cleaning out is a church, which is a place where a lot of people gather. And right now, most of the churches around the world are empty because you're not allowed to have church services. Right. And the other thing you're finding yourself cleaning out is a very old house, right? A very old house that is a wealthy kind of house, like it's ornate in some ways, right? It's spectacular. So this was brought up in one of our talks, but I'm extending it out a little bit and I'm still playing with it. So I'm not 100% there, but the places that are being made empty right now are hospitals. Like they keep saying that like the hospitals are full, but all you have to do is go to the hospital and see that there's nobody there. Hospitals are empty. College campuses are empty. Churches are empty. Old buildings are empty, but for some reason are having a lot of attention paid to them. And if it all follow the Tartaria line of research, these are places that seem to serve as junction between realities, right? If people are going to show up from who knows where, they seem to come out of old buildings, like train stations, like old chariot, right? Like that seems to be like where they're dropped off from the other dimension or something like that, right? Like they emerged from them, but nobody ever saw them go in. Right? When they bring the new children or the new people to inhabit, whatever the place is going to be, right? So all these places where restaurants, you're only eating outside, you're not eating inside. Why does every place have to be empty? Are we getting ready? We've talked about this before. Our reality is getting ready to merge a little bit, right? Yeah. And it's the reason that these places need to be cleaned out, empty but cleaned out, is because something is preparing to come into them. Right? That is not just the new congregation or the new owners of the house or whatever. Like, why do all these things need to be cleaned out now?
When I'll go back to the beginning of our talk, when I was saying like figuring out like what we're doing next. Like I'm talking like, yes, this is how we figure it out by talking about these ideas and sharing these observations. What I pay more attention to Steiner, I almost purposefully don't want to read any of the philosophy. There was a time I used to read all the esoteric philosophy. I haven't read anything like 10 years. But what I am very interested in is life path. Like what happened, like, you know, Steiner and being part of the theosophical movement, and then how he broke off from that. And like, you know, that's the stuff which I get really into. And like, you know, who are the players, who are friends, who are enemies, that sort of shit. So, are you ready for the next layer down?
Yeah.
Because this lines up just with what you were saying.
All right.
So the way how, like, I had this, the whole time, like, I was in the house for 2 days prior. I worked there for 3 days. And for the first 2 days, I just had a feeling. I'm like, what's going on with this house? Why am I here? You know, just being open, you know, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I'm looking for something. I just had that feeling. So then on the third day, I figured it out. And I figured it out. I figured it out when I was going through all of their artwork. And so it was just like maybe 50 or 60 framed pictures. And like a lot of them are busted frames, or which are ones which are good enough to go to the auction house, and which are, when I say the auction house, I'm not talking like Sotheby's. I'm talking like, you know, an Amish auction house, like lot auctions, like box of 15 like frames, you know, that sort of auction house. And it is, I'm going through all this stuff and like looking at the pictures and like not knowing what I'm going to get. But I had this feeling, this is what I'm thinking in the back of my mind. Like, I bet you I'm going to find something in the back of one of these. Like, you know, I'm thinking like an envelope with cash, you know, something funny. Going through and I see this picture, and it's of the guy who lived there. And I know it's a doctor. And there's all sorts of crazy like 1950s doctor stuff. Like there was this huge vat of like codeine and alcohol, and then someone wrote seawater on top of it, and like you'd smell it and you're like, no, that's good. And all of this like equipment from the 50s was there, because I think the medical office used to be there. It was a doctor who lived there. And I go and I see there's a photograph, and the photograph looked like it was a pretty recent photograph. And I say that based upon the clarity of like the pixelation, I guess. And it turns out, I think it was from 2000, maybe the late 90s. And it said, how Williams gives the commensurate statement at such and such. And I flip it over and you see this really, really old guy, and he's in front of this Washington, D.C. monument. And I can't tell what it is. He's standing in front of who the monument is. I'm like, oh, that's the guy who's here, because I know it's Dr. Williams and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, holy shit, that's the name of the school, which when you go into the school where the kids go, it's Williams Hall. And so like, I quickly went and confirmed that was the name of the founder. It was Hal Williams. And like, yes, it was. And I flip it to the front. And what the front is, it was a framed certificate from the National Center for Homeopathy.
Huh.
And it's recognizing Dr. Williams as an elder within the community. And I'm like, huh. So then I go, because I just have in my mind this one context. I have a very personal context. I've got this Steiner context with him through the Waldorf school. My kids go there, and I literally made a video about like this line of the rose line and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, this guy's got more going on. Like, you know, and again, I'm not espousing homeopathy. I'm just saying like, this is what's showing up. So I go and I see this guy, he's like recognized as an elder within the homeopathy community. And I do a little research at home. And so this, first off, you know, I'll say this about homeopathy. Like, I like the stories. I don't like, you know, I don't care about the science. As soon as I hear, like, tell me the science, tell me the details, I'm like, screw that. Let me just know the story of how it got there, and I'll intuit the rest. But the very first medical association in the United States was the American Homeopathic Association. And then I did what I think was a really, really good YouTube expose on the Rockefellers and the Flexner brothers, and basically how the AMA and like all of these different reports in the early 1900s put out all of the other medical associations that were out there. And then all we have now is the AMA, like, you know, how that happened, how that shift happened. I'm like, okay, if there's this is the beginning of the association, just in homeopathy to begin with. So I'm like, that is the energy which this guy is connected to. So this National Center for Homeopathy, I think, was founded in the early 70s. And it's like, you know, their main goal is to like educate people in homeopathy. And I guess they're pretty big. I know a little bit about homeopathy. I've taken some stuff, you know, I think I can, me personally, I think I can do everything in my head. But that being said, like, you know, people who I know, I'm like, I know who I respect. I know that homeopathy is important to them. So from that, like, I have a positive opinion of homeopathy. And so this Center of Homeopathy, it's out of New Jersey. And this guy, Howe, is one of the founders of it. And I just pulled up their Facebook page, and they're big enough that they got 42,000 likes. So it's like a pretty legitimate organization. I couldn't find really any other data of it, but I'm reading about this guy. And so he was the dean of, in the 70s and 80s, there was only one place in the United States, if you wanted to go to school for homeopathy, like if you wanted to go and enroll in a program, there was only one place which was being offered, and it was through this National Center of Homeopathy. And this guy was the dean of it. And only place, 70s and 80s, you could go. And you know where he taught it? He taught it exactly where I'm living now, which is a college, which is empty. They just closed the whole thing, Millersville. So everything which I've been writing about for the past 8 months about bringing me to this number 57 right in Millersville, and like how all of this strange like Waldorf stuff brought me here. Now I find myself in the exact same like place where this guy was teaching homeopathy there. And the first article I found on this National Center for Homeopathy on their website, it was like homeopathy's history with epidemics.
Okay. Wow. All right. So you ready for me to jump in here? Okay. So when I first met you, weren't you working at an apothecary?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So it's not the same thing, but there's a similarity between those things. So you were inching ever closer, right? You were sort of inching towards this idea, whether you knew it or not.
Right.
Okay, so I just started, this is the third week, I just started an internship with someone who I've interviewed on my health-based show named Dr. Keysbury, right? And she's a chiropractor, but she's also into nutrition response testing, and she uses homeopathic remedies. And she's also begun making her own. She's figured out basically, you know, how to do it, right? She's using, in my opinion, a more updated and magical way of making homeopathic remedies than the classic way. But just like you believe you can do everything with your mind, so does she, right? And so you know, she has enough level of results with people that there seems to be something to that, right? So one of the things that she's been finding consistently, like, and she's creating homeopathics for this, is something that she's just been finding it in the last several weeks, right? She's been finding some unknown virus, not coronavirus, right? Some unknown kind of virus that is creating congestion, sometimes dizziness, stiffness in the joints and things like that, right? And she's also finding what she's calling off-planet metals. She started finding it the week that we did a last interview with her. And off-planet metal sounds quite a bit like off-planet media. So that's a funny little synchronicity. Right. Okay, and it's OPM, right? She writes OPM on the bottles. But basically, like she's saying, these off-planet metals, it's not like they're coming from another planet. It's like they're coming from another dimension. right? So imagine if there's another reality that's pretty close to ours that see maybe what we're experiencing and why things are so crazy. And we talked about, like, you know, if new things are going to be coming into some of these spaces, having to keep them empty because you don't know what's going to happen when that's happening. Well, if this other dimension or this other reality has their own kind of, let's say, chemtrailing program, right? That has their own kind of metals that are different than the ones we've been exposed to. She's finding this in everybody's stuff, and she's finding a virus that is not coronavirus, but is some sort of weird thing that is just making people feel a little weird, a little funky, a little congested, right? And if you're sitting there in one of these kind of old school buildings going through some of this stuff at a time when there's sort of realities merging, I mean, look what has happened to your life. Like, look at how your reality has shifted over the last, since I met you. Dude, it's weird. It's crazy, right? Like how much information we've gone through since I met you just a couple of months ago. Right? It was like in April or March or April that I met you, right? But there's something new sort of coming in, right?
Yeah.
Like, so from you know, and maybe whatever that reality is experiencing our dimension or our reality move into theirs as well. And there's this sort of, you know, uncomfort, right? But I'm just imagining you sitting there, reading all this stuff, having this congestion with sort of effects coming in that there's not going to be. Like, they're not so far able to find a medicinal cure for coronavirus, right? They haven't been able to come up with the vaccine as fast as they want to, right? Like, the answer probably is something akin to homeopathy, and you're sort of sitting there having this moment with it all, right? And homeopathy is really about like extract, like taking a little very bit of something, it's frequency, and like making it more potent by dilution, right?
With water memory. Water memory is the key.
With water memory, using distilled water, right? You use distilled water in homeopathy, and it's just tiny, tiny, tiny versions. And the way a lot of people are doing it today is they're more just like zapping it with intention. In the same way somebody would use a water structure, they're using it more with a mental imprint that they've sent from their mind, right? It's a different kind of mind control. You know, it's maybe the kind that we're going to start practicing in our group, right? So I'm just sitting there going, yeah, it has to be, we have to find ourselves, I mean, in these weird places. And it's kind of like, you know, did they pick you to be there at that point for a reason? Or did you do this? Did you create this whole mystical path of stuff? And it's like, you know, it's the proverbial chicken and egg kind of question, right? Like, you know, like, was I picked or am I doing the picking kind of thing? But I'm sitting there like, you're on something here. Like, right? Like, one would think that the most interesting thing about this guy was that he had this thing with Rudolph Steiner and started this school, but then you dig back further and you dig back further. But it's like, you know, it seems like homeopathy is going to be the thing of the future. So are you digging into the past, or is the past the future? Are we at a junction where time is going to start, you know, like it's going to become omnidirectional, right? Like,
I got to interject for 1 second because it's so friggin' crazy. So the last couple of days, I went down to Ocean City, Maryland.
mm-hmm.
And it's not my cup of tea, but I was down there for whatever reason, and I make the best of it. I like to make the best of it. And I was doing field research. I got to see how, like, what's going on there. I've been watching chemtrails intently for at least 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least probably about maybe 10 to 15 years. Now, I'm not like, is it Scott Carnicombe? Is he like the chemtrail, like guru godfather? I'm not at that level, but I put my time in. I don't take samples, but I study the skies, and I've got an observer's eye.
Yes,
and I saw chemtrails. So when I say I've studied chemtrails, I know what I'm looking for. I've got a good point of reference for what I'm about to say. I saw something this weekend in Ocean City, Maryland, I've never seen before. I saw circle chemtrails. So almost imagine like at first I'm like, is this just like an acrobatic plane, like one of these, like, you know, and they're just like it kind of had that feel. And Ocean City kind of has, like, you know, they're always flying along the beach there, planes which are pulling long banners, which would be like all you can eat seafood, $11.99. Like, so like there's a little bit of that element which is part of it. But if you scratch a little bit beneath the surface, about like 30 miles, 40 miles south of Ocean City, Maryland, is Wallops Island, which is NASA's like second most used launching site, like after wherever, like I guess Cape Canaveral is number one. So weird shit's always happening out of there. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, those are chemtrails, those aren't contrails. Like you could just tell by how long they stay and how they expand. And so I've never seen anything like that. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, this is a different type. Like something has shifted, just like what you're talking about, whether it's like a bleed through, or like, you know, it's like something has shifted a little bit. Like, yeah, they're still doing chem, or maybe like it's leveled up, but like they've never done circles before.
Okay, so I haven't seen
circles, and I watched the plane lay it.
Okay, I've hardly seen any of what we normally think of as chemtrails in the last few weeks, but we have seen also some anomalous kind of skywriting and weird kinds of things here as well. But what I'm thinking about when you're saying what you're saying is like, you know, with like witchcraft or things like that or something, right? They draw a circle in the sand, right? You have like with Chad Stumpke just this past week, and we were talking about these metal rings, these portals or stargates, right? Like what if it's literally like there's something on the other side and they're trying to poke through. So they're creating the zone where like the energy field is different, right? For something to be able to come through.
Wow. Wow.
Now, remember for like a couple, I don't know if it was where you don't live in a big city, but for like from the weekend that the riot started until just it seemed to cease after July 4th. But every night there was a fireworks going off, right? People just everywhere, all night long, fireworks, fireworks, fireworks. And I started to think like, what is the purpose of this? Like, okay, is it to get people, you know, accustomed to hearing gunshots? And now that didn't resonate for me. What resonated for me is that they're trying to poke holes in the fabric of space and time to let something in, right? Like smaller holes, more local. We obviously are aware of like the kind of stuff that's been done with both CERN or then quantum computing, where they're trying to reach into other dimensions and pull resources back. But this is a little bit more just direct, right? And so if you are able to, in certain thinned out spots, like create a blast zone, right? You see that oftentimes, even if you just go back and watch Fringe and stuff like that, they'll set up a perimeter, they'll create a frequency field, and then they'll be able to pass through to the other side, right? So I'm wondering if your circular chemtrails are something like that.
I mean, that makes, when you describe it like that there's something about that rings true or feels right, about there being something like a conscious push through. And I almost felt like, as you were talking about it, it's more so from like the other side.
Yep.
Like the other side is what's dictating, like just like however I got this job cleaning out this house, cleaning out this basement, like, you know, the other side dictates that. Yes.
I think the other side is dictating everything, but there's people on this side that are aware of it. So they're creating the conditions to sort of like either they can't stop it, so they're trying, right? Or they're participating in it, right? So, I mean, and it could be forms of manipulation in different kinds of ways, but yes, I agree with you. It's being dictated by the other side. It is not this reality moving into something else. It's that reality trying to penetrate this one. And
so let me ask you a quick question. How are we on time?
Oh, we're good. No, we don't.
Okay, because I want to go down. Can I go down one more layer?
You can go down too.
All right. So I took a whole bunch, like part of my negotiations, like when you're a professional like me, you become a really sharp negotiator. Mm-hmm. And so part of my negotiations was whatever I was going to be able to find in the house, I could take whatever I could take. He's like, of course, all the good stuff is already gone. You can take whatever you want. So I brought home a lot of really, really like awesome stuff. And books were important. I took 3 books. There are 3 books which I took. And the book which I took, and I brought it down and I was reading it, I was reading it in Ocean City, Maryland. It was called The Secret Life of Plants. And it was written in the early 70s. It was written by Peter Tompkins. It's like one of those like, kind of like 1970s alternative bookstore sort of place, like, you know, kind of magical, kind of new agey. But this one is like based upon science, because this is, if you remember, there was a movement in the 70s where like everyone would talk to their plants.
Yep.
You know, depending upon how old you are, you may, you know, if you're a listener, you may or may not remember it. You may have heard of the pet rock. The pet rock came from, there was research that came out in the late 60s about this guy. His name was Cleve Baxter, I believe. And he was a top-notch polygraph tester, like, you know, lie detector. And he put by just like happenstance an electrode on a plant, and it moved. And then from that, like, it started this whole sort of thing where he was able to document that plants responded to all sorts of different things which we say and feel as human beings. And so throughout the 70s, like, that was introduced into the consciousness, and people started talking to their plants because they saw them as sentinel. And then like that turned into like, oh, you got the pet rock. And then it became, and like it brought us to where we are right now, where that's kind of like a kitschy sort of idea. But I'm rereading this book, which came out at that time frame, and I'm reading like all of the studies and all of the testing which they did, which was showing and demonstrates a very, very like a tangible and measurable interaction between human beings and plant life. And they were doing like Russian studies and all this sort of stuff. And I'm reading this, and I got this from the good doctor's house, Dr. Williams' house. And I'm like, the reason why this is ringing so true to me as I'm reading this is, and I've been familiar with a lot of this stuff before reading this book, but this book is more along that line. It's because I've been working with this idea for a while that the internet is has to go, and it's inherently anti-human and anti-earth, but it is a reflection of something which is true. And so the question I've always had is like, what is the question which is true? Like, not something like, it's got to be something tangible, something we could all like touch and feel, like the internet, but it's not going to be quite like that. And I'm like, this is it. You know, this was written in the 70s, so there was no context of like, oh, this is just like email. This is just like, this is where you'd store information and other people. And I'm like, this is the real internet versus this artificial inversion internet, which came from the natural world.
Yes.
You know, like hardware is hardware, you know, that's stones and crystals. Firmware is like, you know, that's plants. And then you got like software is water. And it's like, okay, you could see like all of this sort of stuff going back to it. So I'm like going through all this, and I'm getting like all, I'm thinking there are two ways where Dr. Williams is really like showing himself in mine and Jenny's life. Mine is like in this like thought as it relates to like the real internet. And then, and the other part is like, you know, Jenny has young girls who also go to the Waldorf school, and she's beginning to think about alternatives for schooling and what that's going to look like. And so it's literally stepping into that same energy, because the Waldorf school is going to close. And so like, you got to come up with your own solution. And so we're stepping into that energy, and I'm stepping into this plant energy. And so I start going and I start doing some research, and I'm like, well, who's the guy who wrote this book? Because I recognize the name. I remember he wrote a book about the Great Pyramids. And so the first thing I go and I read is this author who is like, wrote like 5 or 6 books, which are like considered classics within like, you know, new age bookstores. Yeah, he started out as an OSS agent. And so then I go and I'm like, what the and then I'm like, let me go look into Clive Baxter, the guy who started it all. Like, I knew he was in a polygraph test. Of course, he worked directly for the CIA. He had their polygraph organization. Yeah. So you got to go and say, like, all of what we're talking about begins with intelligence work as well, and intelligence programs. And these ideas are being introduced by intelligence programs also. Yes. And so like this strange dance of like, well, if I didn't have the weird experience going into the house by happenstance, I'd be like, all of this is just like normal, like counterculture, like let me control the opposition. And then the other part, but now I'm thinking like, is this also a bleed through intelligence?
Okay, well, you just dropped a lot there. First of all, as you're talking, like, so we had our own experience with sort of some of this planty kind of stuff, right? So Laura and I were just taking a course from the Vesica Institute that got into all kinds of things like sound, like acoustic therapy, cymatics, biogeometry, all kinds of things. One of the guys who was like, it was kind of difficult to understand him. And those people that are so brilliant, it's almost impossible to understand them because they start talking and they're talking to themselves. And every once in a while, you're like, oh, I understand that one. And you're able to pull out a thread. So this guy's name, and I would love for I might do a show with the Krimis on this guy's stuff. His name is Gabriel Kellerman. He's Romanian. And he was talking, he's a scientist and an artist. And he draws all of these natural things, plants, faces, fruit, all this kind of stuff. But he shows the way that they are manifestations of what he calls spherical and vortex principles, right? So like he like models out the complete diagram of how the life force works. And a lot of what he draws looks kind of like, the kind of energy you think of when you see the symbol from like Wi-Fi, right? Like this sort of like there's a natural Wi-Fi, there's a natural internet, right? Kind of thing. And his stuff is, this is the part that's, all of his drawings look like the stuff that I see when I would like close my eyes on some psychedelics or even not, right? Like he's talking about like, I'm just going to read you a few of I wrote down a few. I don't take a lot of notes because I'm one of those people like I can't take notes and pay attention at the same time. But he's talking about manifestation of spherical and vortex principles, projective geometry, geometries of manifestation. He talks about blood cells being special tiny resonators, sphere manifestation, nonlinear dynamics, intergalactic ears, galactic discs. The sun has ears. Your spinal column has ears, right? And he has all of on and on these kinds of ideas, right? But if you think about what the internet has turned into, it turned into something that's constantly listening to us. It's sending out information. It's receiving information. And he has all of these diagrams around like plants and animals and babies and all this kind of stuff, right? And when you're talking about that, I'm thinking about these sorts of energies. And if you've ever heard like, so if you listen to any of the people who are like known for creating the technology that we live with today and the internet, they all talk about, they took a lot of psychedelics when they were working on these computers or working on the creation of the internet, and that they modeled the internet after the way vines and plants and stuff hub and like they all grow towards a certain area where there's water, right? Like there's a lot of roots and information kind of there, and then it spreads out, over space. They will acknowledge that they created the technology based on like the inherent intelligence of the earth, like you were talking about, right? And you'll also, if you go and listen to like someone like Paul Stamets, you know who Paul Stamets is? He's a mycologist, right? Like he talks distinctively about the various kinds of like personalities and behaviors of certain kinds of mushrooms, right? And fungus and things like that. And he talks about them mushrooms and fungus being closer to like animals or humans than they are to like other plants. There's a certain kind of intelligence there, right? That is, like a natural version of AI kind of thing, right? Like there's a sentience there that you don't expect from a plant. So I'm thinking about those things. I just had another thought. They're coming so fast to me, I'm having trouble hanging on to them. One of the big tricks that they like to do with us, right, is you'll hear people say, the mind is like a computer, right? No, it's not. The computer is like a mind, right? So all of these things, these technologies, the untruth, right, are all modeled after the truth, but they've done such a convincing job at selling us the story that one day, if we can understand technology well enough, we can get our brains to work like the computer does or whatever, right? The whole thing, you're 100% right. The way that like particularly things organize themselves underground and then emerge and open towards the sun in a particular manner, right? Or spend their life. I mean, look at the way like animals, civilizations, plants, all that kind of stuff, they completely plan their life around where the sun is going to be when, right? Like, you know, and that's something that the computer has totally taken us away from, right? So like it's based on that. That's sort of where the lie is. The lie sort of lies in like the importance of light or something like that in relation to how these things work. But no, you're dead on it. And then did you want to carry on with that thought? Or I had one other thing occur to me while you were talking about this.
Well, keep going. Tell me the one other thought.
All right. Well, it's a little bit different. So if we wanted to carry it on more with with the stuff with the plants.
Well, I just want to say this. Everything we're talking about is connected. Like, and it's all like, you know, pardon the pun, it's all grounded in what you're saying. It's like, you know, it's not like punching through and it's the earth and it's the mushrooms and what connects with what. Like it's all the same thing. We're looking at it and we're describing different things. So I just want to add that to it.
Yeah. You know, so, okay. But yes, I think there's completely something to that. It's interesting. You've even like Terrence McKenna talked about like working for the mushrooms, like they were an intelligence agency. Like a lot of people thought he meant he was working for the FBI, right? But there is an intelligence, like to what you were saying about like intelligence wanting to bleed through, right? Like in this reality, it's in these agencies that do this funny stuff, but it seems to want to bleed through and push through from each level of reality into the sort of next one and sort of design it after that. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I don't like the idea of like the savior is not like a narrative that makes sense to me. But at the same time, like when we're describing this, like that's kind of like there's something which is like as all of the stuff which, you know, as we talk into this computer screen, as we see like, you know, what's being propagated, it's like that's going to fall in upon itself one way or the other, whether you're in it or not. At the same time, this other thing is like popping through it.
Yes. Very
same thing. Like there's this like intertwine. And that's where we seem to be right now in a more intense way than we have before. And it seems to be getting more intense.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you about the savior thing. I think that like there are sort of ideas that want to poke through that can be part of us sort of, you know, saving ourselves or manifesting out of this. But there's whenever savior is presented in a single idea or a single person or one way of thinking, I'm not with that either. All right. What I was thinking about as you've been telling me these three sort of rounds here, how did these people die? Because like they were living in this house when they died.
So Dr. Howe, he died, I think in 2002. That's what I gathered looking at the internet. And I'm assuming, and this is just like a lot of like assumption, I can't say this for certain, the house was passed on to his daughter and she just died. And I don't know why, and I don't know what they died of, but she would have been, you know, obviously, this is 18 years later. And she's going to be younger than her father. So I don't know what the ages were or what the causes of death. And I could not, here's the strangest thing. I put up a lot of obituaries in my time. Like I do a lot of research on people, and obits are one of the best ways of doing it. I couldn't find, and I'm good at finding obits. I couldn't find obituaries on any of them, and I know how to find.
All right, so here, and this is going to take us sort of back to some of this Rudolph Rappoport kind of stuff here. Okay, so this is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Lancaster, obviously, as people mostly know it, is like it's where the Amish people live, and there's all that stuff going on, right? And we have a very particular idea of what the Amish culture is like, right? I've kind of always suspected that it's kind of like the way that they present outward towards the world as a cover for what's really going on inside.
Like, you can't imagine, but go on.
Okay, so did you watch the X-Files?
No, but I mean, I'm familiar with it, and I might be familiar with some episodes.
So I never watched it when it was on, but when I started working with Randy and we talked a lot about Fringe, he would like refer to X-Files. I was like, you have to go back and watch X-Files, right? So just a few years ago, I went back and and watched them. And I had kind of poo-pooed the X-Files when they were on, like at the time. It was like, it's not my thing, kind of whatever, right? But I watched, and they were, even though at this point they're very outdated, they're very good. And a lot of the ideas, we still see extensions of that largely played on today, and some of the kinds of information that we look into. There was one episode, right, where they go to investigate what's supposed to be like the representation of like the Amish people, right? They go into like an area, you know, like that's supposed to be like in Pennsylvania or something. I don't think they're calling them the Amish. It's a dramatization, right? And these people present the same sort of forward-looking thing that the Amish do. But what is really going on underneath it is that they have figured out sort of like life extension or regenerative life. And they basically have these tombs under the ground where they sort of like, when they're ready to sort of pass from one, and it doesn't have anything to do necessarily with getting old and dying in the way we think of it, right? They go down there and they're wrapped in this material from the inner earth, and they just sort of continue on, right? Like it's basically like living forever kind of technology, right? Like, I mean, I saw it a couple of years ago, so I might, a few of the details not quite correct, but it was one of those mysteries. Like they couldn't, you know, they don't want people from outside knowing what they're doing, right? And so like Mulder and Scully, they were able to like penetrate to a certain point, but they couldn't get any further, and it really left him scratching his head, right? Now, I didn't know, when I started telling you the story, I didn't expect you to say that you couldn't find the obituaries, but I'm not surprised that you couldn't, right? So, you know, where are these people?
Wow. Wow. There's this area of Lancaster, like, so it's best known as Amish, but its true history is like, you know, all of Lancaster, like being founded as a city, and it played a major part in the unfolding of what would become the United States. That predates any of the arrival of any of the Amish. The Amish didn't come till later. But what's really significant about this area was this, like literally where Lancaster is the epicenter of the Susquehannock, which was a people who've not been on the face of the earth for quite some period of time. They were the most dominant peoples in the entire Northeast. They were, at least, you know, the history is that not only were they giants, but they were, and that's what it says. That's what it says in the John Smith map. But they were constantly fighting the Iroquois nation, and they were dominating them. And these guys could have lived anywhere, and this is where they lived. The soil here is like, from a geological perspective, it's depth of the topsoil and this bed of limestone which it's sitting on. For whatever reason, there are all these different geological.
That's what they were playing with in the show. It was like that limestone that was under a little certain amount under the ground, right?
So the way that geology tells a story is like during the ice ages, the glaciers like pushed across the plains and came down from like Canada, and it acted like a bulldozer, just scraping the top layer of soil off all of what we think of as North America. And then it just ended like right in this part of really mid-Atlantic, but heavily in Pennsylvania. And then where Lancaster is relative to the Susquehanna River and like the valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, it's like this is where all of the silt, this is where all of the nutrients, all of the different minerals that are found everywhere in North America are found here. And then also there are minerals which are found here which are only found in Africa as well.
Okay, so wow.
And this is where they all land. And this is where the Rosicrucians first came when they came to North America. It's the Ephrata cloister.
Okay. So there's something there energetically, like I've talked about like minerals and the elements on the periodic tables, possibly representing ideas of like gods and different kinds of, you know, like there's something. And isn't Pennsylvania also called the Keystone State?
You got that right.
And people think about that in terms of cops and stuff, but suppose that theoretically, what are cops there to do? Protect something, right? You know, or whatnot, right? So you have this idea of Keystone Cops, but what if like what the Amish is really doing is they're the shepherds of this area of the earth that is a portal to somewhere or somewhen else? Maybe more somewhen else than somewhere else.
Well, I would definitely say somewhen else, because like in the most literal sense, so without getting out there, by living life, like literally they live their lives they don't have to, but they choose, and you know, they're exceptions to the rule, without electricity, without cars, without this, without that. They are embodying a different time on this planet Earth. They're literally timekeepers, just as any people that live in a way which is no longer like really lived on this earth, regardless of what that culture, they're all timekeepers, because they're keeping a way of life embodied. Now, there's a lot of they got like there's a lot of nastiness involved in the Amish community.
Oh, well. Yeah, absolutely.
But
I mean,
yes, there's definitely that which is going on. And Keystone, when we want to go look at it, these nicknames are all they all come from a Masonic sort of organization. And within like actual masonry, within the actual art of masonry, before it became, you know, not calling like Freemasons or talking about the actual stone workers, the secret of that guild was the keystone. And so you would join that, like, you know, in the Middle Ages, and you would learn the secret. This is how you make an archway. This is what you do. It's the keystone. It's the stone that the builder refused because it's different. It's a different shape than everything else. It's this keystone that holds everything together. It's the secret of it all. This is the Keystone State. This is where William Penn had his holy experiment. And Lancaster, literally right where I am in Lancaster, is where William Penn wanted his personal estate to be. Like, what did he know?
It's so interesting. As we're talking about this, like I'm struggling. I keep thinking of things that, oh my God, and then it's like gone. I'm almost like there's a block to talking about some of this kind of stuff. I just had a thought about, and I can't even remember what it was now, because I just did this interesting conversation about Palm Springs with somebody, and you just said something that made me think, oh my God, it's exactly like what we just talked about Palm Springs, and now I can't even remember what it was. And it was just like 2 minutes ago I had the thought. I know what it is. So there's a couple things that Lancaster is known for besides Amish people. And one of the things is, don't they have one of the most famous shopping outlet malls in the world there?
Maybe.
I'm pretty sure.
I think there was, Reading more so. Outlets has changed, because there was once a period of time where an outlet was a real thing. Before, like, that became like they started making clothes, like the Gap made clothes just for the outlet. There was once upon a time where outlets were literally where like major manufacturers would send their seconds, and people, like regular people, would drive there and they would get something for pennies on the dollar. Now it's just a retail scam. Yes. But back when it was a real deal, this area was known for that, here in Reading.
Yeah, okay, because we were just talking about it, Michael and I, in Palm Springs, right outside of Palm Springs, there's basically an area now where there are casinos. It's Native American land, casinos and outlet malls, right? And like this is an area that we were talking about as possibly like things that we think of as long gone maybe still exist inside the earth, like say dinosaurs or that kind of like thing, right? Like maybe when these things that we think of as civilizations that died out, they just go underground, or they just get buried in various layers of minerals, like almost like when we think of the geologic eras, instead of them being linear in time, they're just depth into the earth kind of thing, right?
I read an article that in a mainstream thing literally last week about the discovery of like one of these pockets of life in the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
They're leaking that information. They're dripping that out there right now.
Yeah. So there's something that creates, like this thing, whatever this energy that some things are tapping into, right? Like there's a lot of like elites that live in Palm Springs, and there's a lot of like UFO kind of activity out there. There's all sorts of Coachellas out there. There's music festivals, right? So that's an area that has a lot of energy, right? Something can happen there. And Lancaster is different but similar. And they've had some of the same kinds of things that develop around there. But it's a different kind of landing ground, so it would be a different thing, but it's a similar type. You getting what I'm saying?
Yeah, very much so. I'm pulling out, I want to go and see where Palm Springs is in a map. Like, I know it by, like, you know, it's got a reputation, you know what things are, but I don't know exactly where it is in California.
So it's in the desert. It's kind of like, have you ever heard of the Salton Sea? It's sort of like.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Okay. And it's on the same latitude as like Long Beach, a little bit south of LA.
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half southeast of Los Angeles.
So, and that's near, I see, like, you know, I'm saying this as someone who is not particularly familiar with California. I've been to California, a handful of times in my life. And like, I think I'm somewhat aware of like how things are, but I don't know like all the specifics. So I'm seeing that Joshua Tree National Park, which I know through all sorts of cultural references. Okay, that looks like it's right by Palm Springs as well.
So Joshua Tree is right above Palm Springs, and then Salton Sea is just to the east.
Right. I'm looking at it. I'm seeing how all of this is
a very weird place.
Their lake.
What?
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about. Do we lock up? So we were talking a little bit about like. When you look at the founding of you know what will become the United States, and obviously there were a bunch of different European countries which were like fighting for footholds on what became the United States. There was Spain, and there was France, and there was Britain, and the British kind of won out. But what the British did was they first came to Jamestown. They went right up to Chesapeake Bay, and they came right up in the Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and they got all of that. And then at the same time, they went around and they went to California, and they went straight to like what we now think of San Francisco and the other parts. And all of their navigators were trained by John Dee.
So your favorite. He's one of your favorites. Yeah.
John Dee. And so John Dee is also the father of, you know, who's accredited to Enochian magic.
Yep.
Okay. And so these are the things we want to go and first put John Dee, and now we're going to go extrapolate, and it lines up very similar to kind of what you're saying. So we know there's this California, like particularly like East Coast connection. Like they went somewhere, they knew where they were going, and John Dee told them where to go. Mm-hmm. He trained them, and he's like, "This is where you're going." And they went there basically at the same time. And we've got like the Rosicrucian. In fact, you know, it's often said that Ephrata Cloister and Kelpius were the first Rosicrucians in the New World, but they're like, no, it was like in Carmel by the Sea, and that was done in secret. Like that was the first. Like they were always bookends. Yeah. This whole sort of thing, like they knew that. So John Dee is also known as like the father of state espionage. He's the original 007. Mm-hmm. So we also correspond from the very beginning of espionage, spy work, intelligence with magic, with all of this. But I want to go into Enochian magic, how John Dee describes Enochian magic as working. And this is what was told to him by the spirits on the other side. So you take it for whatever it's worth. This is what they put out there. That these spirits tell them how to punch through to the other side of the watchtower. We have these watchtowers that keep us separated, and this is how you go through it, and we will let in these chaotic energies.
Okay.
But there are techniques on how to go through. And so whether but it was also all about controlling earth energy. Tutelatory spirits is what they called it. And so like, it's the earth layers. It's the pushing through with the chemtrails. It's all of these different
things. It's all about penetration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I think there's multiple ways, right? There's multiple vectors. You can do it through the ground, underground. There's obviously something up there in the sky that something is coming through. In that same conversation about Palm Springs, we were talking about, like, there's like a dome up there. When you go and watch the sky at night, you can see that there's some kind of, we're in something, it's like some kind of glass ceiling that has this sort of energetic wallpapering on it, right? And we were literally watching things like sort of, I mean, for lack of a better term, UFOs or ships or something like that. But what they really were sort of geometries of manifestation come through this like ceiling, right? And
Okay.
I was explaining, I've described this ceiling on many shows, right? And then I'm having this conversation with Michael Sistranino about Palm Springs. And we're talking about the sound systems at the music festivals out there at Coachella, and they use a Function One sound system. And I fucking realized, even though I've looked at it a million times before, that the symbol for Function One, their logo, is exactly what I was seeing like on the dome at top. It's like a four-lobed shape, and then there's something coming through that looks kind of like the geometry of a ship. It's almost like if you can create an opening with sound, then something can kind of come through the middle of this shape. I'll pull it up and show you what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so are you familiar with what a quatrefoil is?
No.
Okay, so a quatrefoil is like a four-lobed shape that if you look at the missing space on it, the negative space, it's the Templar's cross. Okay. So every time, if you like in home designs a lot during mid-century modern times, and they're bringing it back now, you see this four-lobed shape. But when you look at it, your mind is really taking in this Templar's cross that it's not quite picking up. It's like the subconscious part of it, right?
Okay.
But this four-lobe shape is literally like it's all over like the energetic sort of thing of the sky when you're out in the desert there in Joshua Tree watching, right? And literally there's like a point, the very point in the middle, and these things would come through trailing geometry behind them, like, right? Like it was really weird. Let me show you, let me pull up this logo for Function One sound system. So Function One sound system is like what they use a lot with like techno music, right?
Okay.
So let me open one. This one's probably the best one. Let me see if I can pull it up big on the screen. Nope, it's not letting me go up big on the screen there. Hold on just one second. Let me find one that's like the easiest to look at. All right, let's try this one. I'm just gonna show you like this. Okay, screen share. And here we go. So people who've heard me talk about this already, but I wanna run it by him. Okay, so do you see this Function One here?
Yes.
Okay, so the four lobe, you see the four little arms to the side? Right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this thing in the middle looks like a UFO, right?
Okay.
You see it?
Yes.
You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the top, bottom, that center sort of thing we're looking at from the
This is also what the inside of their speakers looks like.
Right.
Okay, see that there's the speaker, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the little UFO thing.
Right.
It's all over the sky in Palm Springs, like at night when it's dark and there's no, like if you go out into Joshua Tree, right? And you look, you can literally see energetically, like it looks like that. And these things come through. And when they come through, they're trailing like a trail of geometry behind them, almost like the remnants of the pattern they had to fold themselves into to come through, right? Like sort of, right? And they come through and they open up and there's a trail of geometry behind. But when I saw this thing, that this is the Function One is a sound system, and they've talked about how Function One sound systems are useful in transcendent experiences, right? And we're talking about like penetration. So like using sound to open up dimensions, right? That's one way to do it. In the ground, something with the limestone, and they were performing some kind of rituals that did, I think in that show, have some kind of chanting or noise or something like that, right? So it's like a certain earth elements, certain sounds or tones or frequencies, something opens up and something can come through.
Yeah.
And so, and the Templar's cross, right? There's been, did you ever see that video that came out a couple years ago that shows how the Templar cross looked like the creation of a light photon?
No.
Like, so yeah, it was that, I think I first heard about it from Tracy Twyman, right? A couple of years ago. And I saw this video or something like that. And it shows the same thing. Like it opens up into this like Templar kind of thing. But if you look into like like how, so it obviously is for sound, right? That's a sound thing, the function one thing, but it's also creation of light. So it's a light sound thing, something, an energy that sort of goes, and this goes to some of the stuff we were learning in the biogeometry too. It's like a vortex going one way and a vortex going the other way, right? Like if you have a toroid that has a vortex through the middle, it creates that shape that is both ends of the Templar's cross. And the negative, so whatever the negative space would be, I don't know if the point is the four lobe shape or the point is the Templar's cross, but the negative space would be the opposing one. Does that make sense? Or am I getting too?
Yeah, I'm following.
Yeah, right. So there's something, light, sound, the creation of these sort of shapes like cymatics, like it opens up that kind of thing, and something you can move through from one reality to another. Or one level.
What's happening right now?
Yeah.
What do we do? So like, I mean, I want to circle this back, and maybe we'll jump into that in part two. Is like, there is we don't realize what's actually happening, but it's happening all around us, and it's bleeding through right now in a way
Right
it hasn't before.
Right now. And every moment, every moment that we watch them talk about the new mask policy and people needing to wear goggles and shit like that, it's a moment we're not playing with this, right? Like this thing is here and available right now. Like this has been like the thing that's been on my mind most the past week or so. You know what I mean? Like the whole football field is empty and everybody's paying attention to something that's just at one end in one corner, right? But this energy is available all around, and it's like we can clear the whole field. We just have to kind of figure out the exact mechanism of what this is. And this is what we're going to be playing with, right? In our group. All right, should we bring this hour to the end and then continue this over in the other side? I think you have one more round of your story, and then I want to kind of get into some of this, some of the, I think there's another combination of tools that goes with this sort of sound light thing that could be kind of interesting to play with. All right, so before we get off the public hour, tell people where they can find you.
SusquehannaAlchemy.com is probably the best place. On YouTube, that's where I put up most videos. That's Susquehanna Alchemy, and then also Instagram, Susquehanna Alchemy.
All right, he has some really cool stuff there, guys. All right, you guys know where to find me. You found me here. We're going to go over to the other side, patreon.com/offplanetmedia. We will see you over there. Goodbye.